back to my channel. My name is Patricia Meredith, and I am an author of historical mysteries. The first three in the Spokane Clock Tower mysteries are currently available in all formats. They are really fun, character-driven mysteries set in 1901 Spokane. And then I've got a new book releasing at the end of this month, A Deed of Dreadful Note, which is the first book in the Anna Katharine Green mysteries. And Anna Katharine Green was the mother of detective fiction. She was also a mother of three. I myself am also an author and a mom of two. So are we able to find the time to be both an author and a mom? I will go more into that next week on Mother's Day weekend, but this week what I really wanted to look at is part of being a mom and an author means that I read a lot of books with my kids. That is really how I find the balance, is we read a lot and we are all inspired by that in our own writing, because of course, even my own kids have taken off and started writing their own books. So not only am I an author, I'm also homeschooling my kids. And so we find a lot of time to read some incredible books. So today I just wanted to highlight some of our favorite reads that we have done together. Now, one of my favorite quotes is one from C.S. Lewis. And he said, "No book is really worth reading at the age of 10, which is not equally, and often far more, worth reading at the age of 50 and beyond." And now this is C.S. Lewis, the author of the Narnia Chronicles, right? The Chronicles of Narnia. Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe is obviously the most well-known, but he wrote lots of books. He wrote lots of nonfiction. He wrote a couple other fiction books, including a space trilogy, which is really fun to read. But the Narnia books are something that you can hand to anybody, and they will get something out of them, whether they're a Christian or not. There are so many layers to these stories, and yet they were written for children. And of course, the Chronicles of Narnia are not the only ones like that. I have shelves of books, but I've chosen some of my top ones that I wanted to kind of highlight for you as you're making your reading lists. Perhaps you're wondering, what can I read with my kids this summer as we're coming up to that? Or maybe you're already planning your homeschool for next year. So I wanted to look at some of the books that we have used in our homeschool because I believe in living literature, which means that you are reading books that are timeless, basically, that are always going to have an impact on both the student who is reading them as well as the teacher. So if you are a homeschool parent, perhaps you'll find some new classic reads to include in your list next year. And if you're just a parent who loves your kids enough to hand them a good book, then here are some that I highly recommend. Or if you're even just an adult who just enjoys reading kids literature, like C.S. Lewis said, there is something about kids lit that just really hits us deep down and sticks with us for the rest of our life. So the first series I want to talk about is the American Girls collection. Now, I grew up with Samantha. She's my precious doll. And what's funny is going back and realizing that all of the Samantha books take place in 1904, and I have since then written a series set in 1901. So I guess I've been inspired for a long time by these. In fact, inside of these books, in the backs of them, all of them include basically historical notes. And so you've got Meet Samantha, that's the first one. And then you flip to the back, and it's always called A Peek into the Past. And all of the American Girl books are like this. The ones, yeah, I mean, they're all the historical ones. So this one has Looking Back in 1904. And then it includes lots of historical notes and images and pictures, and it would talk a little bit about anything that came up in the book. And so like in this one, she tears her stockings. And so it has a whole thing about what were stockings like and was it really that important? Yes, it was in 1904. And so I loved reading these books aloud to my kids. And then we were able to really study that time period. So we incorporated it into our homeschool, and it worked fabulous. And I'm really excited to do that with some of the other ones. Some of my favorites from childhood include Felicity, which is a Revolutionary War era, and Molly, which is World War II. But there's lots of other ones, and I highly recommend that you look at the historical dolls of American Girl. It's unfortunate they've basically discontinued them at this point, but there's some incredible stories in there. of young women through history. And it's all fiction, but they're all inspired by real events. So they're really fabulous reads and a great way to tie literature and history together in your homeschool. Another book that we used as a jumping off point for studying history was The Invention of Hugo Cabret. This book is so much fun. Oh my goodness. Okay, so it is a series of pictures. So sometimes it's a series of pictures like this. It flips, and it's like looking at a movie, right? You can see him moving across, right? But then there's words too, right? So my kids read through these really quickly. I know it looks really impressive, right? You're like, oh my gosh, how are my kids ever going to read through this? It's no longer than your average children's book. I mean, it's probably 10,000 words, so it won't take you that long. It's just the beautiful pictures in between. Now, this particular story is about the first film ever made, which is French. And it's about the history of film. And so we really loved this book. We were able to look up more about automatons and French history. He references the time a train came through the train station, came through the window. And then the history of film. So we ended up looking up all these old black and white, silent films and studying all of that. And it was so fascinating. It was so cool. And the kids absolutely loved it. And of course, then wanted to make their own. So Invention of Hugo Cabret is so dear to my heart. It's one of those that has stuck with me from being a kid. And I was so excited to share it with my kids. Again, they are 7 and 9 now. So, but we actually read this, I think it was a year or two ago. So they were even younger than that, and it held their interest. So he also has 2 other books, Wonderstruck and The Marvels. So definitely check all of those out. They're excellent. Another series that we just love going through, we're about 3 or 4 books in now, is the Little House on the Prairie series. These are fabulous books, if anything, because they are a jumping off point for talking about a lot of really tough themes. It encourages a simple lifestyle. I mean, as soon as we dive into these, they want to make their own syrup, and they want to, make their own dolls, and they want to make their own, etc., because that's what life was like back then. They're just really good, clean, encouraging reads. And again, it's one of those series that really sticks with you as an adult and are just as fun to read again and again. Kind of following along with that thought, Usborne has a series of books that are called The Extraordinary Life of XYZ. We have 3 that have to do with space and engineering and that kind of thing, because both of my kids are fascinated by space. They would love to build houses on the moon and all sorts of things. So I love reading them stories about Amelia Earhart, Katherine Johnson, Neil Armstrong. These are fabulous biographies. They are very clear and easy to read. My 9-year-old just sat down and read them himself. Nice big words. And then in the back, there's a timeline of their events in their life. So we were able to talk about timelines, we were talking about history, and I think biography is just a fabulous way to teach history to kids because it breathes life into history. It's why I love writing historical fiction, is because of the people, right? People in history, they haven't changed. They're still people. And by reminding ourselves that, nothing has really changed, that these people experienced, love, life, loss, just as much as we do today, it inspires us to create a better future. So spoiler alert, we're going to end up with a lot of history-driven books, because that's what I love to do, is introduce my kids to history through a literature book and then talk about the facts within it. So one of the best series for that is the Royal Diary series. And I only have one of them up here right now, but I actually own like 14 of them. There's several of these. And they go all the way through history, and they're all women who had an impact on history. We just did a whole ancient Egypt unit, and so we were studying Cleopatra, right? The end of ancient Egypt is Cleopatra, and then you go into Rome and ancient Greece and all of that. Absolutely fascinating, really, really well read. All of them are written as diaries. So it's like reading epistolary, right? So they're fascinating. Well, in the back, again, there's historical notes. So it had a great jumping off point to talk about the Library of Alexandria and all sorts of things, ancient Egypt. It was fascinating. And very clean reads, right? Okay, you think Cleopatra and you're like, how is that appropriate for children? Well, it's not. But this is, because this is going to take place before any of her later escapades. She is young. She's only, I think it goes from when she's like 12 to 14 is my memory. So it's her early years. They do have her meeting Mark Antony earlier, but nothing happens. So if you're looking for good, clean reads, there's like Marie Antoinette, Anastasia, all these stories that you're like, how is that going to be okay? It really is. Trust me. These series are wonderful. They're a great jumping off point for any section of history that you are learning. There's one that's the last princess of Hawaii. So it goes all the way through, and that's one that has stuck with me forever. I couldn't believe that I had never heard before that Hawaii had a monarchy. And it was just fascinating to me. So they have done a really good job of having a lot of diverse characters. It's not all Europeans. It is from all over the place. Chinese, African, Hawaiian, all over. So absolutely an incredible series. So in a similar vein with famous women in history, Hidden Figures. So there is a full adult novel of this, but they have wonderfully set up a junior read of it. So for this one, we actually watched the movie first, and then my son is currently reading the book. The movie was, by the way, completely appropriate for a 7 and 9-year-old. They found it fascinating, they found it interesting, there was no bad language. If there is, it's very, very minor. There's nothing bad in it that they can't handle. There's some, tough themes, but there are things that I think we need to talk to our kids about, right? To encourage a better world tomorrow. So Hidden Figures, absolutely top-notch, excellent book. Highly recommend. Another series that is great for homeschooling in particular is the Chasing Vermeer series. I actually don't know what the whole series is called, but there's the Right Three, there's the Calder game, and then there's one more. But they are fabulous. So this one in particular, because we've already done this one, it includes pentaminos, which is a mathematic tool. So it goes into talking about how you can find these all through the world. And then there's a hidden mystery in the pictures themselves that you have to solve by the end. There's a secret code. There's riddles. Not to mention the mystery itself, which is someone has stolen a famous Vermeer painting. So we used this to study Vermeer, right? We got to dive deep into his art and the art of that time period. Well, each one of the books in the series focuses on a different artist. So this one's Frank Lloyd Wright. And then we've got Calder, right, who does the hanging mobiles. And like I said, I don't know what the fourth one is. But these are incredible. And they are easy reads. But again, I would encourage reading them with your kids because, again, there's just so much to look up and do alongside them. Fabulous series. In a similar vein, we absolutely love the Magic School Bus books. There's a whole chapter book series, and that's what I highly recommend picking up. We have jumped off of those with studying our own stuff. So, we read Rocky Road Trip, and then we do a study on geology. So we got a collection of rocks and looked at them under a microscope, that sort of thing. So these are, they're fiction, but it's science included. You might look at some of them. Some of them, I think the science has changed a little bit. We've learned more in science since the publication of some of these books. But these are a great next step. If your kids love the picture books, which I love the picture books. We still use the picture books too. We're doing a biology lesson right now. And so we're doing the human body. And so we grabbed as many of those books about the human body as possible. And then we read the bone one, this one. The Case of the Missing Bones, so that way we could study the skeletal system. So we're just going through each of those. So this is a great series to continue the education with a fun twist, because Ms. Frizzle is always going to be one of my favorite and most inspirational teachers that I've ever had, and she was in a book. These next two are actually kind of hard to find. We did a whole series on Yellowstone because we went to Yellowstone, and so then it was fun to read a bunch of books about Yellowstone when we got back. But my favorite two are these two, Cubby in Wonderland and Cubby Returns to Yellowstone. And these books follow a young black bear cub through Yellowstone. And it's it's basically just a tour of Yellowstone via literature. I mean, they go to each location. We had a map from when we went to Yellowstone, and so we were able to follow along where he's going. And then it just reminded us of all the science that we learned there, and all the, it was an incredible trip. Yellowstone is absolutely one of the top, core memories that I'm going to have of raising my kids. And I'm so glad that we got to do it with our homeschooling. So it was kind of a road school type thing. It was an absolutely fascinating trip. And then getting to come home and kind of continue that wonderful feeling. We had just moved. This was a great way to just sit with the kids and really connect over literature. I don't know if you can find these anymore, but if you can, they're definitely worth picking up. Getting back to the classics that I highly recommend, these two books we actually ended up listening to as audiobooks. So if you've not discovered audiobooks through your library, that is the number one way to get audiobooks. Tell you what, free through your library. They download straight to my phone through Libby, and the kids love just putting on a book, and then they'll draw or do Legos or whatever. I highly encourage incorporating that into your, not only just homeschool, but just your life, because it gives you space to get things done, right? I can be cooking dinner and know that they're listening to an incredible literary book, right, being read to them. And then we can discuss it. Stuart Little and Charlotte's Web are wonderful, incredible reads. They are classics for a reason. Two other classics that I highly recommend is, of course, Peter Pan. My daughter and I absolutely love Peter Pan. So any version of Peter Pan that we can find, we will pick up right there. So beautiful illustrations. There's so many versions out there. Pick up a copy that just inspires you. Find one that's unabridged, because it's a longer story than you think. Unless you have seen like the musical version or like the old Mary Martin version that was filmed. Wonderful, wonderful version of the play. And basically the story, the book, is just it's a story version of the play. If you ever read the actual script for the play, it's actually really fun to read through it, because all of his description that ends up in the book is also in the play, but it's in the little stage notes. So it's really fun to read through that one. We once listened to this on audiobook read by Jim Dale, and it was, of course, wonderful, because anything read by Jim Dale is amazing. So Peter Pan is another classic I highly recommend. Also, this is a series that fewer people have heard of, The Castle in the Attic. The second one is Battle for the Castle. This is another series that I just highly recommend. Again, we listened to it as an audiobook on a car ride, actually, and we finished the first one on the way out, and then we listened to the second one on the way back, and the kids loved them, just devoured them. There's no photos, there's no pictures inside of the book, so it's a higher level read, but listening to it being read, it absolutely fascinated them. There's magic and mystery and history, and the main character is a boy who does gymnastics, which is just rarely seen, and it's fascinating. I mean, he uses his gymnastics in order to, accomplish things in the book. But there's knights and castles and ladies' fair, and it's just a wonderful book. And it's also about moving. So if you've recently had to move and start over, both of these books are really good for that transition. It just provided some really good discussion. Another series that I highly recommend from my childhood is the Indian in the Cupboard series. This is another one where if you get later into the books, I believe it's the mystery of the Indian in the cupboard is the one where they have moved. And so it's another one that was really good for when we moved from one state to another. It really helped the kids to kind of cycle through that, right? And we had some great discussions. So Indian in the Cupboard, I highly recommend it. However, I also strongly recommend that you do a study of Native Americans at the same time to kind of notice how far we have come Since the writing of this book, there's definitely some language that is not used anymore. I mean, the cover alone. So it's I highly recommend doing a study along with that to really encourage some more. A deeper look at the Native American culture because they're so diverse and they're so cool. That being said, this book actually does a really good job of delving deep into Iroquois culture specifically. She really did. She tried to be for her time period. She tried to cover the real history, not just the current perception. I guess let's put it that way. But we did really enjoy reading this book. The kids were more interested in the magic of the cupboard, in bringing their toys to life, right? So then they have to go run upstairs and play with their animals and pretend they're coming to life. So, that's the part that my younger kids, right, latched onto. But then we also did a Native American study of Iroquois, and then we did Sioux and Ute, and looked at how diverse it is and how different it is. And it was a really good discussion. Again, that's why I love homeschool and why I love literature, is because it encourages discussion. So, and ultimately, that's what we need, right? Another really encouraging read that I just love reading over and over again is Anne of Green Gables. This is another one that's set basically in the time period of Samantha and what I love to read. It's turn of the century, and it's just such an encouraging read. It's such a positive development of character. She is such a good character to want to live like, right? She's someone that you want to embody in your own spirit, because she's so positive and so encouraging in everything that goes on in her life. And I strongly recommend, if you're going to watch a version of Anne of Green Gables, I love the old, I think it's from the 1980s version. It's absolutely wonderful. It's beautifully filmed. The costuming is incredible. The hair, like, it's all choice. Excellent. Actually filmed up in Canada. Like, it's wonderful. So, but Anne of Green Gables, if you haven't read the book, highly recommend. This is an encouraging, wonderful read. It's just gonna bring light to your life. So, of course, I have to mention Wind in the Willows, which, if you have followed me at all, you know that my husband collects versions of Wind in the Willows with different illustrations. We currently have 36, I think, different editions with different illustrations, because every time we find one that we don't own yet, we just have to pick it up because they're just incredible. This is one of my favorites. This is illustrated by Robert Ingpen. Let me find one of the big ones. I mean, they're just gorgeous. They're just so evocative, and it's a wonderful story. This one we have listened to. Oh, there's one of my favorites. This is a wonderful story. Anthropomorphic animals, just living life, and you might be familiar with like Toad and his whole character plot line. But there's some wonderful filmed versions of this. There's some wonderful radio dramas. BBC Radio did one, and they're beautifully done, beautifully read. I've listened to a couple different audiobook versions, but this was one that was really fun to read aloud with the kids, and is very near and dear to our heart. And the crossover is, we love Wind in the Willows, and then I also love Winnie the Pooh. So Winnie the Pooh is very near and dear to my heart. These are my collections that I grew up with. But then up here, the crossover is A.A. Milne, the author of Winnie the Pooh, once wrote a play called Toad of Toad Hall, which is about Wind in the Willows. So we have Wind in the Willows by Kenneth Grahame, and then we have A.A. Milne's plays up here, including Toad of Toad Hall. So it crosses over with our two incredible loves. So, and then I've got two very old editions of Winnie the Pooh. This is actually a second edition of the second book, The House at Pooh Corner. So these are very, very precious to me. But these are the copies that I grew up with. These are the poems. So if you do Winnie the Pooh, you can read the poems, and then of course the stories. Now, Winnie the Pooh, you might think, who needs to read Winnie the Pooh as an adult? Oh my goodness. Speaking of that quote from C.S. Lewis, This is one of those stories, Winnie the Pooh. The reason it's a timeless classic is because, look at those illustrations. E.H. Shepard's just so good. The reason Winnie the Pooh is a timeless classic, I mean, there's a reason. It's so well written. It is so witty, and there's so many layers to it. You can do, I mean, there's been whole books dedicated to looking at each of the characters in Winnie the Pooh. So if you have never actually read the stories by A.A. Milne, I highly recommend you do. They are ones that I can read and listen to over and over again because they hit on a different level depending on where you're at in life. And they're definitely worth reading and rereading with your kids at multiple times during their life and during your life. So Winnie the Pooh for the win. Paddington Bear. All of those books are incredibly enjoyed by my kids, and they specifically love listening to the audiobooks at night. This is something that like puts them to sleep. They love listening to the Paddington stories. There are a bunch read by Hugh Bonneville, who played Mr. Brown in the movie of Paddington, so they thought that was pretty cool. And then some read by Stephen Fry. And they're just really, really good. They're wonderful short stories. I mean, if you love Winnie the Pooh, this is the next step. Paddington is so fun. They're just, he's a whimsical bear. He's wonderful. Another book that I absolutely loved as a child and that I cannot wait to read with my kids. I haven't read it to them yet. Inkheart. Now, the very first book in particular, and don't bother with the movie, the book. The book is a love letter to books. It is one of those books I wish I could write because it is so perfect. It is so beautiful. And there's so many layers to it. Highly recommend this book. It just encourages reading. It encourages literature. It's about bookbinding. There's so many things in here to unpack. And it's one of my favorite books from when I was a child. And then we've got a couple chapter books that my son would want me to recommend. We've got Frindle. This one's wonderful. It's about the invention of words and how does a word end up in the dictionary. So if a kid makes up a word for a pen and starts calling it a frindle, how is he going to get that into the dictionary? Wonderful story. The Chocolate Touch is the story of King Midas, but with chocolate. Wonderful, fun story. And of course, along the same lines, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. This is one, again, that if you've never actually read the book, of course you've probably seen the movie. And if you haven't seen the movie, I highly recommend the musical version with Gene Wilder. That's our absolute all-time favorite version of the book. But the book itself is also really fun to read. I'll be honest, this is the only Roald Dahl that I actually like. I'm not a huge fan of Roald Dahl, mostly because he deals with a lot of very negative and dark themes. This one is the least of those. I very much like the book. It's very, very good. So if you're going to pick up a Roald Dahl, I would recommend Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Ooh, and of course, I can't get away without mentioning Wishbone. This is one of those series that I can't believe they haven't re-released it yet. I mean, they've done the Old Magic School Bus, they've done Reading Rainbow, right? But they haven't re-released Wishbone. Where's my Wishbone? I love these books. So these are the three that I've been able to hunt down through time. At one point, they had released, novel versions of several of the episodes. But these are great introductions to literature. Again, they just get you excited and start introducing the basic storylines. So that way when they pick up the book later, it will seem familiar enough to them that they are encouraged to read the whole thing. And then a couple other classics that just stick with me that I absolutely love. Mrs. Frisby and the Rats of Nim, one of my favorite stories of all time. Didn't care for the cartoon because, again, it was darker than the actual book. The book itself, though, is wonderful. But don't read it if you have actual mice in your house because it'll make you want to take care of the mice instead of getting them out. So, The Phantom Toll Booth is also another one that, oh my gosh, I love so much. But, caveat with this one, I was introduced to this one as an adult. Again, my mother-in-law gave me this book and was like, I think you need to read this book. I can't believe you've never read it because I think you're going to love it. And she was right. I absolutely love it. However, I read it aloud to my kids, and as much as they enjoyed it, they didn't catch all of the themes. This is definitely one of those ones, it's like Alice in Wonderland, where it is a wonderful children's book. They love it for what it is. I mean, you can see how it's water damaged and very well read. Absolutely love this book, okay? But as a kid, there are so many layers that you don't catch until you're an adult. So many references to everything. I mean, just perception and reality and words and music and where does sound come from, and there's so many layers in this book. And the kids loved it on one level, but not on the same level that I appreciated it as an adult. So I highly recommend it, but I would say older is better, actually, to read this book. A younger kid can read it. They will find so much more in it when they are older, like 12 and older. But that being said, a younger kid would also enjoy it. All right, just a few more series that I highly recommend. One is the Tales of Magic, which begins with Half Magic. This is by Edward Eager. There are many books in this series, but I highly recommend this series. They were really fun to listen to. Again, we actually did these on a road trip. This first one is they find a coin. So 4 children find a coin, and it answers their wishes by half. So, of course, mayhem ensues. And each one has a different group of children and a different kind of magic. I think sometimes the kids overlap, but it's different adventures. Very 5 Children in It or Enchanted Castle. In fact, there's lots of references to those books because this was written later. And they're just wonderful, simple stories that make you start talking to your kids about, well, if you had a wish, what would you wish for? And then the last series that I absolutely have to recommend is The Kingdom of Renly. These are wonderful books. There are tons of them in this series. They are very quick, easy reads. So these are ones that my 7-year-old can read on her own. And they are just fun little stories. We've got a main character, boy, girl. And so they just go on adventures. There's a whole map that came with our boxed edition. So it's a perfect introduction to fantasy reading. You've got dinosaurs and mermaids and pirates and giants and dragons and prince and princess and all sorts of adventures ensuing with the main characters. And very easy to read, fun to read. And for really any age, because even my 9-year-old, he whips through them. But it's fun to have a series that my 7-year-old can read on her own. All right, I think that's it for today. These are my top books that I highly recommend that you read with your kids. Like I said, I will be doing a video later on that is highlighting specifically mysteries written for children, because there's several that I highly recommend, many of which I don't actually own in print because we've gotten them through the library, but they are fantastic mystery series. So be watching for that. And then next week I'll be releasing a video about being a mom and an author. So be sure to tune into that. Join me for a cup of tea, and I'm just going to talk a little bit about how do you do that? And I tell you what, it's so much fun to be raising young readers and young authors at this time. It is just so much fun. So thank you for tuning in. Be sure to hit that subscribe button and like button. Leave me a comment below. What are some other children's books that you absolutely highly recommend? I love adding to my TBR with my kids. So I would love to hear what you recommend and what do you go back to as an adult, right? That just the stories that stick with us. Thanks again for joining me, and I hope to see you next week. Bye!